My son called on a Saturday afternoon, and I almost let it go to voicemail. I was out back splitting wood, the kind of mindless work I'd been doing more of since I retired, just to have something to do with my hands. My phone was on the porch railing, and I could see his name on the screen from where I was standing. He calls every Sunday. Not Saturday. Saturday, he's at the hockey rink with his kids, or driving somewhere with his wife, or doing the 100 things that fill up a weekend when you're 41 with a family and a mortgage. I stood there with the axe in my hand and I thought, he'll leave a message if it matters. I answered on the last ring. Hey, Dad. His voice was fine. That was the first thing I noticed because I was listening for something without knowing why. Completely fine, easy, like he'd just called to talk. We went back and forth for a few minutes about nothing in particular. He asked about the woodpile. I asked about my granddaughter's skating competition. He mentioned the drive from Guelph to his place had been bad that week, construction on the 401 again. Normal Saturday conversation with my son, and then, right at the end, just before he said he had to go, he said something that stopped me cold. He said, "Dad, do you remember that thing we used to say? When I was a kid and I wanted you to know something was wrong but couldn't just say it." I went very still. When my son was 14, he started spending weekends at a friend's place in the neighborhood. I didn't love the situation. The friend's older brother was the kind of kid who made me uneasy in ways I couldn't fully articulate. So my son and I made an agreement. If he ever needed me to come get him, no explanations required, no questions asked that night, he could call and say he'd forgotten his jacket. That was all. I'd come. I'd never tell his mother unless he wanted me to. He used it twice in 2 years. Both times I drove over and brought him home and we stopped at Tim Hortons on the way and I let him talk or not talk, whatever he needed. By the time he was 16, he didn't need it anymore. That was 27 years ago. Yeah, I said. I remember it. Another pause. Okay, good. Anyway, I'll let you go, Dad. Talk soon. He hung up. I stood on my porch with the phone in my hand and the September air going cold around me, and I understood two things at exactly the same time. The first was that my son was not in physical danger. His voice had been too controlled for that, too measured. The second was that something had been wrong enough that he'd reached back 27 years to find a way to tell me, without saying it out loud. I put the axe away, went inside, told my wife I was going to drive over to see the kids, and got in the truck. He met me at the door before I'd even knocked. He'd been watching for me. That told me something too. We sat at his kitchen table while my daughter-in-law took the kids to the park to give us space. She knew something was happening. She had the look of a woman who'd been waiting for someone else to figure it out. My son wrapped his hands around a mug of coffee he didn't drink and told me about a man named Calvin Bryce. Calvin had moved into the subdivision 4 months earlier, into a house 2 streets over from my son's place in Barrie. Mid-50s, recently relocated from Calgary, or so he said. He'd shown up at a neighborhood barbecue in late May and introduced himself around with the easy comfort of someone who'd done it many times before. He was a financial planner, he told people. Semi-retired, just doing some consulting work, keeping busy. He had a warm handshake and the kind of face that seemed to agree with whatever you were saying. My son's neighbor Derek had mentioned him first. Derek was the kind of guy who trusted people quickly and loudly, and then told everyone else to trust them too. He said Calvin had looked over his RRSP contributions and flagged something his actual advisor had missed. My son heard this story at a street hockey game in June and filed it away as interesting. By July, Calvin had been inside my son's house for dinner twice. This is the part my son kept apologizing for while he was telling me. He kept saying, I know, I should have thought about it more. And I kept telling him to stop, because I understood exactly how it had happened. Calvin Bryce was not the kind of person who makes you think about it more. He was the kind of person who makes you feel like thinking about it is unnecessary. He had good stories. He knew things about hockey that were worth knowing. He brought wine that was better than what you'd normally bring, and then made a self-deprecating joke about it, so you didn't feel outclassed. He had the unhurried confidence of a man who'd already arrived somewhere and wasn't trying to prove it, and he had, in that slow and patient way some people have, started asking about me. Not directly. My son was clear about that. It was never a direct question. It was sympathy. Things like, it must be a big adjustment, your dad rattling around in that house since he stopped working. Things like, retirement catches people off guard, even the ones who've planned for it. Things like, has he got a good fee-only advisor? A lot of guys his generation think they can manage it themselves, and that works fine until it doesn't. My son, because he loves me, and had no reason to look sideways at a friendly neighbor, said that I was pretty careful with money. had been a millwright for 32 years, had a pension through the union, owned my house outright. He said this at his kitchen table to a man he thought was a friend, and he felt like he was standing up for his father. By August, Calvin Bryce had asked twice, in that same indirect and neighborly way, whether my son thought I might want someone to take a look at how my retirement income was structured. Just as a favor, nothing formal. My son had said he'd mention it to me. He'd fully intended to. Then in early September, Calvin came over on a weekday afternoon while my son was at work. He brought something he called an updated summary for my daughter-in-law, a revised look at something he'd apparently gone through with them earlier, their TFSA's some general observations. My daughter-in-law is sharp. She'd sat through it and asked questions and gotten answers that sounded right. But she told my son that night that something had felt off. She couldn't say exactly what, and that Calvin had spent the last 10 minutes mostly talking about me. How he'd love to sit down with me informally, how he thought I might benefit from a fresh perspective, how she might be the right person to suggest it, because I'd probably trust the idea more coming from family. He'd asked my daughter-in-law to set me up. She'd told my son that night. My son had spent the next 10 days trying to figure out what to do about it. He didn't want to alarm me without knowing more. He didn't want to accuse someone of something he couldn't name. He didn't want to be wrong. He knew I'd spent my whole working life around guys who trusted their instincts, and he knew that I'd built a wall around myself after his mother died, not a visible one, but the kind you can feel from the outside. So he used the only thing he could think of, that I'd hear without question and without argument. He called on a Saturday and brought back a jacket we hadn't thought about in 27 years. I let him finish telling me everything. I didn't interrupt. I asked 2 questions when he was done. Had he or my daughter-in-law moved any money based on anything Calvin had suggested? No. They'd been thinking about it, had a casual follow-up conversation penciled in, but nothing had moved. And had he noticed whether Derek or anyone else on the street had actually transferred anything? He wasn't sure about Derek, but he mentioned an older couple at the end of the block, the Paulsons, 70 and 73, who'd mentioned a few weeks back that Calvin had helped them reorganize something in their non-registered accounts. I asked if he had anything on paper, any documents Calvin had left, any summary sheets, anything with account information or a business name on it. He went to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a folder. I want to be careful here about what I say next, because I've thought about it a lot since then, and I think getting it right matters. I am not a fraud investigator. I spent 32 years as a millwright, then a shop steward, then a foreman. What I know about scams, I know the same way most people know things they haven't been trained in, from reading, from paying attention, from living long enough to see the patterns. I am not the expert in this story. What I did right was not solve the problem. It was call someone who could. My brother-in-law has been an RCMP officer for 23 years, most of it with financial crimes out of the Ontario Division. He's retired now, living outside Kingston, but he still knows everyone worth knowing. I called him from my son's kitchen while my son sat across from me. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what I had. He asked a few questions, short ones, the kind that tell you the person on the other end already has a shape for what they're hearing. He asked for the business name on the documents. He asked what province Calvin had said he was from. He asked whether the Paulsons had mentioned a specific type of account or fund. He went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Don't touch anything yet. Don't go cold on the guy either. Just hold where you are." He said he'd make some calls. He called back in 2 hours. Calvin Bryce had a registered address in Alberta for a numbered company that didn't appear to have ever operated. His financial planning credentials, when checked against FSRA records, didn't exist under that name. There was an open investigation in British Columbia under a different name, different city, nearly identical approach. Neighborhood integration, family referrals, gradual access to retirees with defined benefit pensions and paid-off homes. My brother-in-law told me that what they needed, if this was going to go anywhere, was a formal solicitation, a pitch, something on record. He told me what to do and what not to do, and I followed his instructions exactly. I texted Calvin Bryce that evening. I said my son had mentioned him, said I'd been thinking about whether it made sense to have someone look at my income structure. Said I wasn't in a hurry but wouldn't mind a conversation if he was offering. He responded in 9 minutes, said he'd been hoping to meet me. Said he could come to me if that was easier, no need to drive anywhere. Said he was free Wednesday morning. I said Wednesday worked fine. I spent the 2 days between then and Wednesday going through what I had and staying steady. That was the hardest part. Not the planning. Just the staying steady. I'm 61 years old, and I've buried my wife and negotiated contracts and walked picket lines in February in Northern Ontario, and I still found it hard to sit across from a man at my kitchen table and pretend I didn't know what he was. He arrived in a gray Audi at 9 in the morning. He shook my hand with both of his, the way some people do to make a handshake mean more than it does. He commented on the woodpile out back. He sat down at the same table where I'd eaten breakfast alone for 3 years, since my wife passed, and he opened a leather portfolio and he laid out his pitch with the calm professionalism of someone who had done this many times. He didn't talk about growth. That was the thing I noticed. He talked about protection, about inflation eroding pension income over time, about the risks of keeping too much in GSEs when rates shifted, about a vehicle he called a principal protected structure, not a product, he said, just a structure, a way of positioning existing savings. He used the right language. He used it correctly. If I hadn't known what I was listening for, I might have found it genuinely interesting. And then he said, what I'd suggest for someone in your position is moving a portion, just a portion, into this arrangement before the end of the month. The participation window closes at the end of October, which I know sounds like a manufactured deadline, but that's just how the structure is set up. There it was. I nodded slowly and said that made sense. I said I'd like to see something in writing before I committed to anything. Force of habit. He smiled and said, of course, absolutely, take your time, and slid a document package across the table. I looked at it for a moment. I said I'd like to keep it overnight, review it the way I did with everything. He said that was completely reasonable. He left at 10:40. I photographed every page and sent it to my brother-in-law before the Audi had turned off my street. By Friday, the account listed in the documents had been confirmed as a shell. The numbered company in Alberta was connected to 2 other names in 2 other provinces. The BC investigation had been looking for exactly this kind of documentation. They moved on it the following week. I won't say more than that, because some of it is still working through the system. But they moved on it. The Paulsons lost some money. Not everything, and some of it has come back, but not all of it. I think about that. I think about it when I drive past their house. An older couple who trusted a friendly neighbor the way you used to be able to trust friendly neighbors, and I don't have a way to make that feel okay. What I keep coming back to, though, is the Saturday phone call. My son is a careful person. He's not a man who panics or makes noise about things he can't name. He sat with this for 10 days, turning it over, trying to find the right words, and when he couldn't, he went back 27 years to find words we'd already agreed on. I think about the 2 times he used that signal when he was a teenager. A Friday night, a Saturday night, 2 situations I never asked him to explain in detail, and he never fully did. I drove over, I brought him home, we sat with bad coffee and didn't talk about it unless he wanted to. I don't know what would have happened if we'd never made that agreement when he was 14. I know that both those times he needed a way out that didn't require explaining himself in the moment. He needed it again at 41. Not for himself this time, for me. After everything had settled, on a Sunday in November, I drove to Barrie for dinner. My daughter-in-law made a roast. The kids were chaotic in the way that kids are when they've been inside all day, and they've found something to argue about that will be completely forgotten by bedtime. My son and I sat at the kitchen table after, when the kids had gone upstairs and my daughter-in-law was cleaning up, and the house had gone quiet in that particular way it does on a Sunday night when everyone is tired and comfortable and nothing bad is happening. My son looked across at me and he put his hand on the table, palm up. I put mine on top of it. We didn't say anything. There wasn't anything that needed saying. If you've got someone in your life, a parent, a brother, a child, anyone you drive to in the dark without needing an explanation, make an agreement with them. It doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be something that belongs to the 2 of you, something you'd both recognize after 20 years. Something that means, I can't say this out loud, but I need you to know it anyway. Calvin Bryce had spent 4 months counting on the fact that families don't talk about this stuff. That they're too busy, too polite, too far into trusting the wrong person by the time someone notices. He was right about a lot of people. He was almost right about us. The only thing that changed it was a jacket my son had forgotten in a house on the other side of the city a quarter century ago that we'd never actually left behind.